Hello everyone and welcome, a big Creative Careers welcome to Series 2, Episode 2 of Creative Careers. Creative Careers is a series of talks with industry creative professionals about their careers, as it's in the name, about their jobs, how they got to those positions and how you, the people watching this stream, might do the same. So pretty cool stuff. But episode 2, we're having a conversation with professional storyteller Lori Stahl. But in case you missed it, episode 1 was with YouTuber The English Simmer, aka Molly Foe Wilkins. And she spoke to us at length last week about how to run your own successful YouTube channel. So if you missed that one, check back on our YouTube channel and you'll find the video from last week, as well as all of the videos from Series 1, which ran at the end of 2020. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss any of the talks coming up. We have next week Tom Wright, YouTuber for Bouldering Bobat. He makes rock climbing YouTube videos and created one of those biggest rock climbing communities in the world, and doing so with about 160,000 subscribers, which is pretty damn good going. So if you want to hear how he did that and how you might do the same, join us next week. But this week, as I said, it's the time of Lori Stahl. So I had a really interesting chat with Lori Stahl a couple of weeks back about her unconventional job title. She's a professional storyteller, and about how you get to work with a whole load of diverse clients, what it is she actually does on a day-to-day basis, and how you can use storytelling superpowers. How university isn't necessary, but you might get a good couple of life experiences out of it. As always, Lori gives us some tips about how to follow in her footsteps and do the same thing. So feel free to contribute in the live chat of this video. At the end of the interview with Lori, we'll go into the live Q&A on Discord. You will have the link to that one popped into the live chat towards the tail end of the interview. So watch all the way to the end and you will get that link to the Discord for a live conversation with Lori, as I said, hosted in Discord. So don't miss that opportunity to actually have a chat with her and ask her any of the questions that you want to ask about storytelling and using sort of narrative powers professionally in your professional life. But enough from me. Feel free to like this video and subscribe, but in the meantime we're just going to jump into that conversation with Lori that I had with her a couple of weeks back. I hope you enjoy. I'll be back at the end for a couple more nuggets of waffle and show you that Discord link. But for now, here's Lori. Cool. Hello, Lori. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Callum. How are you?
Smashing. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, mid-December feelings are really resonating with my soul at the moment. Like I'm feeling pretty festive. I don't I don't know about you.
Well, I'm expecting some snow, so that'll definitely put me in the kind of holiday mode.
Nice. That gives our viewers a little inkling as to when this is being recorded, because this is going out at the end of January, but we're speaking pre-December. No, during December, mid-December is what I mean. But we're not here to talk about the time of year. We're here to talk about you, Laurie, and what it is that you do, and how it is someone else may follow in your footsteps to do the same thing. So I'll pass over to you and let you introduce yourself and what it is that you do.
Thank you. Pressure's on. Well, my name is Lori Stahl, and I am a storyteller, a professional storyteller, and it's the sort of thing that conjures up different ideas in different people when they hear that role. So the way that I define it is the a role that takes kind of strategy and creativity and brings those two things together to help whoever it is communicate, whether that's yourself, whether that's a client, whether that's anybody, a colleague. It's bridging those two pieces together to be able to engage people.
Amazing. So what do you do on a day-to-day basis to facilitate that bridging of logistics and creativity?
I knew you'd ask something along those lines. Um, one of the things I really like about my job is the fact that it's never the same. No 2 days are ever the same. And so what that really means is that on a daily basis, I'm doing different things. So one day I might be running a workshop with a bunch of colleagues to actually kind of pull out ideas from them. On another day, I might be helping put together a pitch document to sell some ideas. And on another day, I might be training some people. We might have come up with a narrative across the business, and not everybody knows about it. So we might have training sessions to get everybody on board to know what they're doing. So every day is different. Sometimes I'm interacting with people. Sometimes I'm at a computer writing, and a lot of times I'm doing research. So, there are so many variations to what you can do in this job.
Hmm. And when you mention everybody, who is everybody? Are you doing this on your own as a sort of a consultant, a freelancer, or are you working as part of a wider group?
So I work as a consultant. I have been in-house doing similar roles. And when I say in-house, I mean working either for a big brand or even a small brand or at an agency. So I have had full-time jobs where this is relevant. Now what I do is I get hired by those businesses who don't have this kind of a function within their own permanent team. So I can come in on projects. It could be a week-long project, or one of the things I'm working on now is going on 2.5 years. So it totally is again never the same.
Hmm. And it doesn't sound like a conventional role. So I think we'd be surprised if there was a conventional way to get to that role, to the position that you're in. So could you talk a bit about how you got there?
Well, I think if anyone were to guess the way that I got to where I am, they would just absolutely never guess. Uh, so I had no intention, let's say. I didn't think about this is what I want to do. I just have always been a storyteller. I find a story in absolutely everything, and I remember things and tie those pieces together. But my career started in finance. And so, there's not a lot of creativity in the way that I would describe it in finance. And from there, I moved into a more creative field because finance was too rigid for me. I went into events, event planning, and eventually I just started to see that what I enjoyed about the work that I was doing and dealing with different clients was learning to know what they were talking about and how what they were saying at a conference or an event or a party or whatever it was, how that tied in with, let's say, their advertising campaign that I see on TV or a press release that they had put out. So all of those pieces I started to show more attention to, and I started to be the one who was writing scripts for presentations by CEOs. And it just kept evolving from there. So I got involved in telling the stories at conferences and then looked at, well, how is that story part of the bigger picture? Which basically then took me to the role that I'm in now, where it's not about only events, it's about what is being said across every output that a business or a charity or whatever organization might be putting together.
Right. So are you principally working with the written word?
A lot of it is written word, and for me, that was kind of my evolution into actually being able to call myself a storyteller, because I was uh, doing part of the creative role of creating the the story in writing, and that evolved for me. So now there's a lot more than just the written word. The written word typically will come after the first steps, which would be more about what are our objectives, what are the different channels you want to speak in, so meaning print, digital, live, all of those things,
Mm.
and what are we trying to say? And then the writing of it is one of those pieces that comes kind of in the middle of then where you end up seeing it come to fruition.
Right. So if a young person was watching this thinking, "Oh, I love telling stories, but I'm just no good at writing them down," that shouldn't necessarily be a stumbling block, because that's one part of the wider process of generating ideas and sharing them.
I don't have a good example to the top of my mind, but I'm positive that there are many people who would title themselves as a storyteller who, are not good at writing.
Mm.
I personally used to be really bad at writing, like it was my least favorite thing to do, and it just somehow evolved. So I don't think it's a necessity at all, unless of course the way you want to do it is as a copywriter, and then you will need to have
Mm.
to figure out how to write well, but it's not the only way in.
Awesome. And so we've used the word storytelling quite a lot up to this point. It's in your job title. I think it'd be really useful for the viewers if we clarified what we meant specifically by storytelling at this point. So would you be able to define storytelling in this context, and maybe talk to some of the skills required?
Sure. I mean, I think that storytelling as a definition, or more so as a job description, is different. Storytelling in an everyday context is all about conveying a message, taking your listeners on a journey and coming to some sort of conclusion. Even if the conclusion is a cliffhanger, you still bring them on this journey. You've kind of captured their attention along the way. That then translates a bit differently when it's in a work context, unless, of course, you are writing books. I mean, then it is pretty much that's what you're doing, or a screenplay. That's what you're doing as a storyteller. If you're taking storytelling the way that I use it in a work environment, it relates much more to kind of marketing and advertising roles within companies that are marketing a brand or a service or something that they do. So the storytelling piece is putting together the pieces of the story in every place it needs to be reflected. And by that, I mean, I think the inclination when you listen to the word storytelling is that it's about talking. A bedtime story is storytelling.
Yeah.
And it absolutely is about verbal communication, but we communicate in other ways as well. So it's about, in a business context, in marketing and advertising, it's making sure that that story you're telling is fit for purpose for the people who you're speaking to, that it's not just what you want to say, but what they want to hear. And it's not just in writing, it's not just verbal, it's across everything. Even when you see an image, you're conveying a story.
Mm.
And in a work environment or in a brand, you need to make sure that all of those pieces marry up, that they're somehow contributing to the same story. And that's, to me, how you would define the storytelling that I do on a daily basis.
Right.
There was a second part to that question, which I'd forgotten.
Oh, that's epic, about sort of the context and the definition, I suppose, of storytelling, and you touched a bit on the skills, and the second part of that question was the skills required to be a storyteller, and you touched on that in that it's part of a two-way oral communication where you're both orating and receiving, I suppose, in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, the skills are, I think, having a good power of perception, being a good listener, and being able to bring a lot of things together. So in order to tell a story correctly, you need to have all of those pieces. You need to see that, a bit's coming from here and a bit's coming from there to bring it together. And only then can you then repeat it back in a way that people want to absorb it.
Amazing. So that's a fairly clear picture, I would say, of what storytelling is and how you personally use it professionally. So could you give us some examples of how you use that in relation to various clients or in various projects that you may have been involved in?
Yeah, so one example was a couple of years ago, I was working for a big software brand, and they needed to relate in a more human way to their customers. And they were looking at all of their marketing and advertising and everything else that they put out to the public and trying to think about how they could, again, make it more relatable. And so the first step that we did, I was working for an agency and they were our clients. The first step we did was we did some workshops with clients to understand, again, this is the listening before the doing, to understand how they were actually perceived by their customers. Were they human? Were they getting the responses they wanted, et cetera? And we then took that knowledge along with the business's own perception of how their customers saw them and put together a proposal for how we could tell this story. And we decided to put together a visitors center in the office of their building and to identify the four most, was it four? I think it was three actually, most powerful examples of using some of their products that were being used in the real world. And we then worked with the stakeholders, so the owners, so other companies that were using that software. We worked with them to understand what was their experience like. And we then made it into a creative environment where you would come and interact with the stories. In this instance, we added things like smell and sound and movement and video and you name it. And you went from kind of zone to zone hearing these different stories. And we then would look to monitor the perceptions or the changed perceptions from the visits. Did this suddenly make it more relatable? Did it make it so that you actually wanted to ask this company to potentially bid for some work with you? Did you make it, was it more relatable? And the ongoing plan was to then track if there was any correlation between an increase in business for the company that timed it all with the opening or any sort of pushes they had around their experience center. So that's, again, it's not, if you just said to me storytelling, that's not what would first come to mind. And that's why I like that example, because it very much shows you all of the different things you need to do to tell a story.
And that's a very creative solution to what your client, the issue that your client had, well, maybe issue or intentions, to sort of monitor and manage the perception of them as a company. I think a lot of people their first resort wouldn't be to create sort of this sort of immersive storytelling environment, experience almost for their customers and the public to come and experience.
It was quite impressive actually, because they really supported what they said they wanted. And a lot of clients don't do that. So it's very exciting when you get someone who says, I want to do something different than what we're known for. I want to listen to our feedback from our clients. And you can deliver something that you've got a whole team behind you.
Awesome. What about some examples that haven't involved you personally? What about just like in the wider world of storytelling? What are the impacts and potential avenues to explore for young prospective storytellers?
Storytelling can play into so many different roles that you could be a lawyer, as an example. If you think about a trial lawyer, and we all just think to TV and what we see on TV, but you have an opening statement, You need to react to things that are said to you. You need to sell a judge or a jury on the guilt or innocence of, whoever you're working for or against. And so that's something, again, I wouldn't think of when I think about being a good storyteller. I wouldn't instantly think about becoming a lawyer, as an example. Politicians, politicians are brilliant, or at least their teams are brilliant at telling a good story. And, I can give many political examples. I won't go down the road of, of kind of going down specific routes, but, if you stop and think about any one campaign and how they kind of give you a message, repeat it again, repeat it again, repeat it again, you get a following that has bought into your story. So, a lawyer, a politician, I've even heard some people talk about being in the clergy because, you have to give sermons. That's storytelling. That's a very random one to think about if talking about working in an advertising agency. Those two things are so different, but those are other routes that you can go down to also use these skills. It doesn't have to be the route that I've taken.
So if a young person's recognizing these skills in themselves, or thinking that the sort of when you were speaking earlier on about the communication aspect and sort of invested in bringing wider narratives together, if young person's looking at that and thinking, that's a bit of me, then maybe you've just given a load of examples that they might not have considered as sort of career examples. The clergy being the most far out one there. I don't think you'd necessarily consider a career in the clergy unless you yourself have got some.
No, you have to have a calling. But what I'm saying is that the ability to relate to people is something that I think comes along with storytelling, and that's a very random one, but it does fit in. And I think it just more so demonstrates that you never know where you could use this skill.
Definitely. And that sort of ties into my next question, which was going to be about interacting and managing such a diverse range of personalities and sort of the range of clients that you've worked with. So I know we've spoken a bit before about the range of people that you've worked with. I mean, you spoke just then about a software developer, but there's been a whole host of other completely disparate businesses, clients, agencies that you have worked with. I mean, how do you go about sort of managing all of those different people and different environments and still getting the best out of it?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to point out it's never all at once. There's no way I could ever juggle a bunch of different things at once, because you do have to understand quite well the current project that you're working on. But managing different people, it's again, some of it's innate, some of it you learn as you go along. But that going back to what we said before about listening, that's an important piece of the equation when you're dealing with anybody. But obviously, if it's a client or a group of clients or a group of stakeholders, you need to listen to all of them before you can get them on board with you. And so this role is never about me dictating to them. It's working with them in order to come up with whatever works for them and then help them roll it out. So by listening to everybody's pressure points and needs and challenges and their own creative ideas and you name it, you put all of that together and you hopefully are reflecting something back that reflects on what they've said they need. And then they're with you. You're helping them, they want to help you, and you've built up a relationship. I think that's the difference. Is if you're a storyteller, a natural storyteller, you by nature like people, you get along with people. You don't have to be the most popular person in the world. I'm not saying that, but you can engage with someone. You could go into any room, and if you had to, you can start talking. And so by that nature, I think you're good at bringing people together. And it also makes it more interesting. I mean, I've mentioned before, I'm a very random but not quiet guest at any dinner party, because I can talk on a lot of different subjects, because I've worked in, software, pharmaceutical, charities, it's all across the board. So it goes back to the other thing. It's never the same thing twice.
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought about it in a sense of, you are essentially just reflecting. You're listening to what people to what people want, and giving it to them essentially, with a bit of
Exactly.
professional finessing, of course. But yeah, pretty cool. So you studied at university. You mentioned earlier on your first job was in finance.
Hmm.
So you put quite a lot of time, energy. I mean, I did uni as well. I know that it can be a bit of a strain, sort of emotionally and physically at times, to study to that degree, pun intended. Um,
Well done.
Thank you. But you moved away from sort of your area of specialism into a more creative field. So how does that feed into your current professional practice?
Well, I think that my my diverse education, so I had, and this is, I'm speaking in American now, but I had a, a major in economics, and well, it's actually a double major, economics and international business is what I studied.
Mhm.
But my course load allowed me to take a lot of different things. And so that gave me a really broad knowledge of a bunch of different things that I then feel have actually fed into some of what I'm learning about now. It's not necessarily skills that I've obviously translated into the role that I have, but it's knowledge that relates to a lot of what my clients do. So, it was helpful to get a broad education.
Mm.
That being said, though, I don't think you need that to be a good storyteller in many different fields. It depends, again, what the actual sort of role you want to have and what experience it might require to get you to that point. But my route to this was, very different. It's not at all what I would have guessed
Mm.
years ago to start with. And I think anybody who has this innate talent, if they recognize it and they like it, they can, with or without that kind of university education, they still can take it into the real world with them and develop it further.
Well, that was going to be my next question, which was, let's say you don't have that university education. What sort of experiences can you sort of what sort of situations and can you put yourself into to sort of simulate that, as you said, that diverse range of classes that you're able to take, diverse range of people you're able to meet?
I think it can come from anything. I think it's almost the opposite of what what might be limiting. And again, you might be wonderfully creative and it doesn't limit you at all, but what could be limiting is only staying within your tiny little circle,
Mm.
because you're not experiencing for yourself. You might be looking at it through the television or movies or online, but I think it's important to experience things for yourself. And that can be done locally, it can be done globally. It depends on your desires, your budgets. I mean, it depends on a million different things, but you can go out in your own community and get to know your neighbors. You can have multiple different jobs. You can volunteer. You can do whatever it is to be out there in the world,
Mm.
so that you're starting to learn about other people's experiences, how they might relate to yours. And also, and I don't think that we've mentioned this before, but then I think an important part of this is also learning to, or being able to empathize. And the more you interact with other people, the more you understand where they're coming from. And dependent then on how you want to use your storytelling skills, you're better at that whole listening, but not just hearing, actually understanding what's coming from people. And I do think that the only way to really, really get that is to be out there amongst people.
Right, to be properly engaging and interacting on a first-hand basis. What, in your professional opinion, makes a good story, and what makes a bad one?
A good story is something that catches your attention. It's something that you want to hear more of. You hear the opening, you want to know what's happening next. You want to know how it resolves. It's a story that has something more relatable to you than a bad story, which is all over the place, doesn't make sense, or even worse, it's out of context. Because I think that's, again, I hear myself repeating myself over and over, but it's this whole listening piece where if you're telling a story about chickens to an audience who's there to learn about investment, it's not going to interest them. However, if you are being clever and your story about chickens will eventually somehow give you this epiphany, some aha moment that relates to the people in the room, then you need to be able to take them along that journey to have them at the point where you finally have the epiphany. So a lot of it is context, I think.
Right. So if a young person watching this is thinking, right, I can tell a good story. I now know what a good story is, and actually I can recognize that in myself, kind of thing. And they like the sound of the diverse workload. They've got empathy, listening skills for days. We should probably start giving them some advice on how to professionalize those skills, how to get started as a professional storyteller. So could you potentially describe a few entry-level positions or things that young people should be doing right now or considering to be able to get started on that career path?
Well, I think one of the first things that I would suggest, because this is, just my input on all of this, is start looking for other people who call themselves storytellers. And that could be on something like LinkedIn. You could even Google it. There's a lot out there. And first, I would start seeing what their roles are, meaning just how they sell themselves in writing, if you had found somebody online. And then I would start reaching out to people. I've had many, many students contact me, just out of the blue on LinkedIn, just saying, this, I'm curious. I'm a student doing this, that, and that. I'd love to know more about what you do. I'd love to know how you got started. I'd love to know how you specialize in this. And I'm always happy to speak to them. And I have found that, friends, colleagues are always happy to do the same thing. So I'd say, don't be shy about reaching out to people, even if they're strangers, because they'll give you a very different perspective probably than I've given, which is important to have to be able to make decisions. But secondly, you never know down the road if they might end up being someone that's useful to you career-wise, or you useful to them for that matter. So I wouldn't go for the direct approach of, hi, I'm so-and-so, I tell a good story, give me a job. But I think that soft touch of getting in touch, staying in touch every once in a while, asking them if it's okay, if maybe, you check back in 3 months or 6 months for feedback on what you've been doing. I think that's a really important step. That dovetails in with what I was saying about Googling. I actually, did a search myself just to see entry-level storytelling jobs.
Mm.
And it's a good way to also look at it, because it's not only about that title. I happen to call myself a director of storytelling because that resonates with the clients that I have. But there are lots of jobs that it's an essential component of the role, but it is not the title. So I found everything from looking at user experience for digital jobs, entry-level roles, to that, to junior copywriter, to an admin in an advertising agency. So it really varies, and I think the first step is really thinking about, or I shouldn't say the first step, because the first step to me is contacting people, then doing a bit of Googling. And I think the next piece, once you're armed with that information, is, of the research you've done, the people you've spoken to, what has stuck with you the most? Is it going down the route of being a lawyer? Is it whatever, writing screenplays? Is it working in marketing and advertising like I do? And then you can narrow down the job roles. And in some of those, I have to be honest, you get into that kind of business, whichever business it is, just get the foot in the door, because entry level, I was a research assistant at a finance company, but it still was a starting point because I had to write reports, and that, eventually had a knock-on effect. So I think it's more so identifying the type of business you think you'd like to be in, and look for the entry-level roles in those businesses. That was a very long-winded answer. Sorry.
It's a good answer. Maybe rather than thinking about businesses and career trajectory in that traditional linear, you get your first position, you just work your way up the rungs, and that's your end point. Things aren't so clear now, especially when we're working in sort of digital age and digital industries. So yeah, you're right. Just sort of pick the industry that resonates, and sort of you might end up with a couple of side steps here and there, and work your way through it. That sounds some pretty good advice. Good advice to me. So once the stream has ended, what's the first thing that young people should do to start sort of refining that storytelling superpower?
It's probably picking something in the world around you that you can start to see the story in. So I taught a class on storytelling, and the first assignment that I gave the students, these were business school students, the first assignment was to pick a brand. And again, this is me giving it from my lens. It's very different than if you wanted to be a lawyer, but pick a brand and just start noticing all of the touch points where you see that brand. So you might see it on a bus billboard. You might see an ad on TV. You might follow their social channels. You might see someone that works for them give a TED Talk. Like all of those different things are pieces of their story. And it's a good exercise to think about the logic that's probably going behind that, and how the pieces fit together, or maybe don't fit together, because not everybody does it well. So it's looking at, are these guys telling a consistent story? Am I expecting the same thing here, here, and here? Or did they do a really bad job and I don't know what they do? I think that's kind of one of the first things, to just start recognizing it.
Can I ask a slightly tangential question in that way? So that has prompted a thought. When you're looking at a brand and you're thinking, this doesn't make sense, there's no coherency here. Where I see that very often is in perfume ads. Can you talk a bit to the sort of the storytelling aspect of why perfume ads are so esoteric and why they're so bizarre?
To be honest, no. Because I have yet to, I don't think I've ever worked for a straight perfume brand. Like I've worked for brands that have like a perfume component, but it hasn't been the focus. So I've never actually gotten to the bottom of it. I personally sometimes find it very hard to know the difference. You know, when you watch one of them from another, of somebody, you know, floating in the sky or sailing on the water or whatever, which is which. I imagine that the idea is that, you know, the scent, the what the brand stands for, that it will take you to this other world. You know, because most of them are about luxury. Most of it is about travel, riches. I mean, that's what like the first things that come to mind. So I think it's very much, it's like an accessible piece of that world, because most people that's kind of the first entry point of, maybe I can afford a tiny little bottle of perfume, but you can't necessarily buy the rest of it.
That does make sense, and maybe I will look on perfume ads with a bit more kindness moving forward. So, as a final question, so for our young people that are feeling quite excited now off the back of this conversation, thinking storytelling's the way to go, right? I'm going to go and watch all of the brands and notice the narrative and in the real world. How can young people start actively engaging with storytelling? Maybe in not in like a hobby sense, but maybe just not professionally. Just how can people start sort of writing their first stories?
I think that there are so many ways to get out there these days, and one really good example is anybody can write a blog, as an example, and you don't even have to be a good writer. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of them are absolutely brilliantly written, but if you have interesting ideas and something you want to get out there in the world, there is literally nothing stopping you from it. You can start small and expand as you go. It doesn't have to be anything special, but I think that's one really good way to go. Another relatively easy thing to do is, if you're more verbal than written, you can start a podcast. You know, you can have whatever topic is yours and own it. And that's another very good way of starting to tell your story. You could create some sort of, you know, a website that tells some sort of story. I mean, there are a million different creative outlets for doing that. And the nice thing is, even though it's personal, even though it's kind of giving you that that experience more so for yourself, what then happens is it does have a knock-on effect. So if you've, you know, had a blog and you have this many followers or this many readers, and the same with a podcast, when you're then speaking to people, whether it's for an interview or it's the people you might have contacted just to get their words of wisdom, it's not only a talking point, but it shows initiative, and it also actually gives an example of your work. So someone might very well say to you, and it's a very good thing to say to them proactively if you're proud of what you've done, but if they ask you, you know, okay, you'd say you're a good storyteller, but how do I know that? It's something that you could have easily kind of been building up while you're studying, while you have a job. You know, you can do it at your own pace. And so I think any of those things are really good starting points that do have a benefit in the long run as well.
I absolutely love that. I love the phrase you used, there's literally nothing stopping you. And with things like blogging and podcasting, you're spot on. You're dead right. Lori, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for your expertise. And you'll be joining us in the live Q&A on Discord in a moment. And I'll see you then.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed our chat.
Speak good.
Bye.
In a few minutes. Bye.
And there we have it. that's the end of the interview with Lori Stahl, but the live Q&A is about to kick off in the Discord, so make sure you jump over and join us there. The link to the Discord server is in the description of this live stream. It will also appear in the live chat in a mo. You can also find it through the Creative Careers landing page. If you're watching embedded on that one, you will also find it there. So make sure you follow through to the Discord server, where one of our moderators will greet you and give you a role, and you'll be able to ask all of your questions to Lori right here, right now, which is pretty cool. So thanks very much for watching that one. Remember to like, to subscribe, ding that bell, so you can get all the notifications for the videos coming up later in the Creative Careers series. Next week, same time, same place, at 7:30 on a Monday night GMT, we have the chat with none other than Tom Wright, a YouTuber with Bouldering Bobat, a channel with 160,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is pretty epic. So make sure you join us for that next week. He'll be talking about his journey as being a wee lad in Devon and diversifying his skill set to becoming a YouTuber. So join us for that one. It'll be really, really good. But for now, that's the end of this episode of the Creative Careers series with Lori Stahl. I hope you enjoyed it. She is waiting for us in Discord, so I'll quit my yakking and I'll see you over there. All right, have a good evening.